Hi, everybody. Yes, this live session was delayed this morning. I moved my desk around because I got a new stand-up desk so I can move around. And unfortunately, I missed one of the connections, so had to troubleshoot, and that delayed us about 15-20 minutes. So my apologies for the late start, but yes, we're still having the live session, so thank you for your patience, and thank you for joining. So today's discussion is going to be about, is it easier to submit a 510K for software as a medical device versus other types of submissions? And we're not going to compare software as a medical device with software in a medical device, because that would obviously be harder for software in a medical device. And just to cover the acronyms here, software as a medical device would be a mobile app. It would be cloud-based software that you have on a desktop, something like a DICOM image viewer, which is the example that I had shown on the screen. That would definitely be something that would be software as a medical device, and used to be a relatively simple submission because you had to comply with 62304 for the software validation requirements, but that was the bulk of what you had to provide. Now things are a little bit different with cybersecurity requirements. But before I get into that, software in a medical device, that would have electronics. So now we have electrical safety, EMC testing. That makes it a much more complicated submission, much longer. And to give you an longer, we're talking about, there's a complete another section for electrical medical devices. So electrical safety, EMC testing, the 6601-1-6, -1-10, or I'm sorry, 11 if it's a home use device. So there's a lot more documentation that has to be provided, hundreds of pages, a very long report. It takes about 12 weeks to get through that EMC and electrical safety testing, and you're going to have to answer a lot of questions in the submission. And there's also labeling requirements that have to be addressed. And the FDA says, well, where can this be found in your labeling? So the software in a medical device is obviously more complicated than software as a medical device. But if we compare to another device, let's say a syringe, is it easier than that? Because software in it, software as a medical device has primarily software and cybersecurity and performance. Whereas if you look at a syringe, it doesn't have any software, doesn't have any cybersecurity, doesn't have any electrical safety or EMC testing, but it has other types of testing. Just as a point of comparison, I'm going to say performance testing, let's assume that those are comparable between different submissions because they all require performance testing. And they all require device description, they all require labeling, they all require a substantial equivalence comparison. They all require administrative information. So we're going to just go by sections. How many sections do we need to include? Well, software as a medical device has 2 sections now. Instead of 1, we have 2. One of them is the software section. One of them is the cybersecurity section. When we look at a syringe, now we have something that's sterile, something that has to be biocompatible, something that has shelf life testing, something that's going to have package integrity and shipping validation. So there's a little bit more involved in terms of the number of sections. But are they harder? Are there more attachments? That depends on your skill and experience with those standards. But in terms of the number of submissions, documents you have to submit, there are actually fewer submission documents and probably fewer pages that you're submitting for a sterile medical device like a syringe versus software, especially when you lump in the cybersecurity requirements, because there are 10 different attachments minimum for the software section. There are 12 different attachments for the cybersecurity section. So just those 2 sections have 22 attachments. And we don't have anywhere near that many attachments when we look at biocompatibility, sterility, shelf life, and package integrity testing and shipping. So conceivably, we have a lot less to submit for a syringe device, but it's not really fair to say one is harder than the other. It depends on your experience. If you're a sterilization and biocompatibility expert, it's not all that hard for you. If you're a cybersecurity expert, maybe the software isn't so hard for you. But if you ask those two people to switch roles, they're going to have a lot of difficulty. They're going to have no idea because they don't know the standards, they don't know the jargon, they haven't been trained on it. They're completely out of their element. So the key here is don't rate the difficulty or the time requirement for how long one 510K takes versus another 510K based on the number of attachments or the number of sections you have to fill in. It doesn't take that long to attach a document, a couple seconds. It doesn't take that long to fill in questions for a section, maybe minutes, maybe hours, but we're not talking weeks. Whereas coming up with a testing plan, getting quotes from a lab, preparing the samples, submitting them to the lab takes a lot of time. It can take weeks. It could cost you tens of thousands of dollars to prepare the samples. It could require multiple test labs to do that work. And if you're looking at the other side of the fence, the software as the medical device, you're going to have people that wrote the code. You're going to have the team that does the code review. You're going to have independent testers because typically you're going to have somebody other than the person that wrote the code do the testing. So for every single test requirement, you're going to document those test requirements. You're going to use unit testing. You're going to do integration testing. You're going to do system testing. You're going to do validation of the software. You're going to summarize all of those results. So that's a lot of work that you have to prepare in your submission. You're also going to have to work on the cybersecurity side. That's going to be required. You're going to have to bring in somebody that hasn't worked on writing code so they can independently do a pen test report. There are going to be vulnerabilities that are identified in your penetration testing. Somebody's going to have to address each of those vulnerabilities. You're going to have to write corrective actions. That'll mean making code changes. Then you have to revalidate your software because you made a code change. Now that you've done all those changes and you've done all your validation of the software again, now you got to go back to the lab that's going to do the pen testing, have them repeat it to make sure you eliminated the problem. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done for cybersecurity. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for software. And so even though it's done by different people in different labs, and there might be more attachments, they're not necessarily harder or easier. It depends on your experience. So you need to build a team that knows it. So if your team is saying, oh, we're going to add on a sterile accessory to our software and our electromedical equipment, you just expanded the scope of the project and you need to bring in people with that expertise. So the difficulty in preparing the 510K for attachments is seconds. For answering questions and filling in text boxes, that's minutes. But for going out and coming up with a testing plan, providing the devices that you're going to test, getting a quote, executing the quote, getting the test reports, that's where your weeks and maybe even months and tens of thousands of dollars come in. So it's not really harder or easier to do one type of submission versus another type of submission for the regulator that knows all the different requirements. It takes us on average about 60 hours to put together a 510K submission, but it doesn't necessarily take longer for software as a medical device or shorter for software as a medical device. Fewer attachments, less attachments. It doesn't matter how many attachments there are. It doesn't matter how many sections we're filling in. What matters is, does the person that is designing the device and coming up with a test plan need help? Do you need help understanding what 62304 is? Do you need somebody to review all your documents thoroughly, or are they in really good shape and it's just a cursory review? Do you need somebody to redline and edit those documents? Do you need to start over again because they're garbage? That's what takes all the time. And if there are debates, if we need to go do some research and get some additional information, that's what takes all the time. So it's the project management, it's the entire scope of the project, it's the going out and getting quotes and providing samples and writing summary reports and giving coaching to people that are new to this. That's what takes the time. It's not the number of attachments. It's not the number of sections. And one area really, really well, like software or cybersecurity, their section is going to be relatively easy for them, but not necessarily for everybody else. So I hope that answers the question about whether one system is easier than the others or not. But it's all in what is your experience, what is the experience of the team, and hopefully that will help you in your planning. But if you need help, please visit the links below. I'm going to provide a couple of links for you to other resources that should help you out on software as a medical device and 510(k) submissions. And let me know what you would like to see next week. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.